The silence inside Kingsley's, Manhattan's jewel of exclusivity, did not simply arrive. It descended, heavy and deliberate, as if the air itself had swallowed every whisper. Crystal glasses froze midair, silverware hovered in suspended gestures, and the city's elite turned their heads like synchronized predators sensing the strange, the unexpected, the forbidden. At the center of the vortex stood Lucas Montgomery, a 10-year-old boy with metal braces locked down each fragile leg. A tremor traveled from his shoulders to the floor. He reached out, timidly, bravely, toward Diana Johnson, the only black waitress employed in a restaurant that preferred its staff invisible, silent, and interchangeable. Across the room, the piano began a soft waltz. Across the boy's face, something flickered, longing, terror, need. And then, "Sir, control your son." Manager Thornton's voice cracked like a whip, slicing the moment in two. "This is inappropriate. Our staff are not here to entertain children." At a corner table, dressed in tailored solitude, Richard Montgomery stiffened. Billionaire. Philanthropist. Father who had not taken his son out in public since the accident. His jaw tightened as though forced to contain a truth he'd rather spit out. "Lucas," Richard said, low and sharp. "Sit down." But the boy didn't withdraw his hand. And Diana, who had spent 5 long years training herself to speak only when spoken to, breathe only when permitted, exist only inside the narrow lines drawn for her, did not step back. She removed her apron with slow, deliberate grace. She placed it on her tray. "Mr. Thornton," she said calmly, "I'm leaving. My shift is over." Then, astonishing everyone, she smiled at Lucas. "I can't dance in an apron." A ripple of shock tore through the room as she reached out, and took the boy's trembling hand. Lucas took a step, or something close to it. One brace scraped the floor with a long metallic cry. Heads turned. A woman whispered, "She'll be fired tomorrow." Diana didn't lead him. She followed him. And with every awkward, uneven shift of Lucas's small body, Diana adjusted, softened, absorbed the uncertainty as if the rhythm, the moment, the dignity belonged entirely to him. Richard stood frozen, a man suddenly transported into a memory. His wife Elizabeth, gone now for 2 years, dancing with Lucas before the accident, spinning him gently until he collapsed in giggles. She had whispered once, "It's not about the perfect step. It's about the connection." Richard blinked hard. Then the dance stopped, 3 barely their steps, but to Lucas, they were his Everest. "Thank you for asking me out," Diana said formally, as though addressing a man twice her height. She turned to leave. "Wait." The word escaped Richard before he could cage it. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." He repeated it carefully, as if engraving it somewhere deep. Then he extended a business card. "My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. The restaurant inhaled as one. Morning sunlight spilled like liquid gold across the marble lobby of Montgomery Tower, but it only sharpened Diana's sense of displacement. Her navy skirt and sail-rack blouse stood out like a bruise among the polished suits floating past her. "Diana Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery," she said. The receptionist's stare sliced down her outfit, her skin, her belonging. 18th floor. "Miss Winters will see you." Inside the mirrored elevator, Diana closed her eyes. Not fear. Not intimidation. Resolve, the quiet kind born from surviving life's sharp edges. Miss Winters met her with clipped politeness and a surgical gaze. "He had you fired, didn't he? It happens. Clients like Mr. Montgomery complain, and people like you lose their jobs." "People like me," Diana repeated softly. "Where exactly would that place be?" Winters didn't answer. The universe saved her from the responsibility by ringing her phone. "He'll see you now." Richard Montgomery's office looked less like a workspace and more like a judge's dais for viewing the city he controlled. Manhattan sprawled beneath the windows like a glittering empire awaiting command. "Miss Johnson," he greeted, composed and cold. "Sit." The silence that followed was not merely silence. It was a strategy, a cage he expected her to walk into on her own. "Your education?" he finally asked. I have a bachelor's in child development. I began a master's in special education, but had to leave early. You work as a waitress. I work 3 jobs. Something flickered behind his eyes, not judgment, but surprise. Then he opened a folder. I did some research. Freedom Steps. You founded this 6 years ago. Diana exhaled slowly. Of course he found out. Men like him always did. A dance-based movement program for children with disabilities, Richard read. It's about to close. She remained still. Yes. I want you to work for me. A beat of disbelief. As a waitress? At your home? No. Richard's voice sharpened. As a therapeutic companion for Lucas. Diana stiffened. I'm not a therapist. And I don't work for men who reduce people to their price tags. I can pay. No. The single syllable pierced him. He wasn't used to resistance. You think I look at you and see color? Class. Status. That's exactly what you see, Diana said quietly. And your son deserves someone who isn't pretending to care because his father signs the check. She rose. But before leaving, she placed a small card on his desk. Freedom Steps. Tuesday and Thursday. 4 p.m. First class is free. She walked out. Winters whispered, You're insane. Diana smiled. Better insane than owned. Wednesday afternoon, Diana stood at the community center's front desk. Paint peeled from the walls. The air smelled faintly of old varnish and hope. Her sister Zoe ran in, breathless. A Bentley, she hissed. A real Bentley. Outside. Diana peered through the window. Lucas sat in the back seat, anxious but alert. Richard sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead like a man contemplating the limits of his empire. He won't come in, Zoe muttered. But the car door opened. Lucas stepped out first, unsteady but determined. Then Richard followed. Diana's heart tugged. Don't underestimate the power of a determined son, she whispered. Freedom Steps was alive with motion. Wheelchairs spun. Prosthetics tapped. Crutches thumped. Children moved with joyful disobedience to every rule the world had imposed on them. Richard scanned the room with discomfort. It looks chaotic. There's structure, Diana said. Just not the kind you're trained to see. Lucas joined the children, watching one girl spin her wheelchair into graceful arcs. Awe softened his posture. An older woman with silver-braided hair and an ornate cane entered. Dr. Elaine Mercer. Harvard neuroscientist. Legend. Mr. Montgomery, she said sharply. You've rejected my proposals 3 times. This is research, Richard asked, bewildered. I thought this was just dance. Adaptive motor autonomy, Dr. Mercer corrected. It changes neural plasticity. Richard turned slowly to Diana. You wrote those proposals. You were her assistant. Co-author, Mercer clarified. She left her master's to care for family. But the theoretical work, hers. Understanding crashed into him. You recognized me the moment I walked into that restaurant. Yes. And the dance, was it planned? No. Lucas chose to dance. I chose to accept. Reporters entered the studio, cameras, notebooks, questions. Richard stiffened. This was a setup. Not a setup, Diana said gently. An opportunity. One you would have never given us on your own. Zoe burst through the doorway. Diana, it's Lucas. In the center of the room, Lucas stood, not sitting, not leaning, standing. One brace unbuckled. On purpose. The boy inhaled deeply and attempted a step. A real step. Small. Shaking. Imperfect. But entirely, magnificently his. Children cheered. Cameras flashed. The world paused. Richard's eyes glistened. That's why we do this, Diana whispered. Not perfect steps. First steps. Richard barely breathed. "You manipulated me. You ignored us. 3 times." He looked at Lucas again, who was smiling as if the world finally allowed him to exist on his own terms. Reporters swarmed. "Mr. Montgomery, care to comment?" Richard Montgomery, a man who controlled fortunes, bulldozed obstacles, and commanded boardrooms, faced a moment money could not buy. He swallowed. And then, "The hardest thing for a man in my position," he said loudly, "is admitting when he's wrong." Gasps rippled. The Montgomery Foundation will fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years and build a full rehabilitation center. On one condition, Ms. Johnson retains complete autonomy. No corporate interference. Silence. Then pandemonium. Flashes. Shouts. Cheers. And Diana, whose life had been people's afterthought, became the center of a revolution. 3 months later, bulldozers pushed earth aside where the new Freedom Step Center would stand. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't gold-plated. But every inch was built with purpose. Diana supervised. Lucas visited often, now using only a single lightweight brace. And Richard, much to everyone's astonishment, showed up regularly. "I never imagined you'd attend board meetings," Diana teased one afternoon. "I never imagined I'd study neuroplasticity at 50, Richard retorted, massaging his temples. His book was full of notes. "But here we are. You care?" Diana asked quietly. Richard hesitated. "My son asked to remove his second brace last week." "I know. He told me. His therapist said it was impossible." "You fired her," Diana reminded him softly. "And she was wrong." Richard exhaled. Slowly. "Why haven't you accepted my apology?" "Because you haven't given one." He froze. "You changed policies. You funded the center. You altered the world around you." She looked at him steadily. "But you never apologized for the way you saw me." Richard's shoulders fell. "For that," he whispered, "I am truly sorry." 6 months later, the Freedom Step Center opened its doors. Children of every mobility profile filled the hall, spinning, crawling, hopping, rolling, dancing without apology. Lucas led a small routine. He stumbled, corrected himself, and beamed. Richard stood back, letting him lead. "He doesn't need you to hold him any more," Diana said, stepping beside Richard. "No," he agreed. "But he needs me to be present. That's the difference." Richard turned to her. "Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me how to follow." A reporter approached. "Mr. Montgomery, what's the greatest lesson you've learned?" Richard looked at Lucas, helping a younger girl balance. "That leadership," he said, "is not about guiding others down the path you choose, but following when someone shows you a better way." Freedom Steps expanded to 3 cities. Hospitals began adopting their methodology. Diana received national awards. Lucas enrolled in a regular school, became a youth spokesperson, stood taller than his disability, than his fear, than the accident that once defined him. And Richard, once caged by control and wealth, learned the most difficult truth. Real power isn't controlling every move. It's knowing when to step back and let someone else lead. In a world where people rarely change, where privilege rarely bends, and where invisible lines divide us all, the story of Richard, Diana, and Lucas became something larger. A reminder that revolutions begin not with empires, but with a single courageous step, and someone brave enough to follow it.